There are dozens of brands and hundreds of saddles available on the market today, and I think one of the hardest things when someone's getting into saddle hunting for the first time is knowing which saddle to buy and what to look for in a saddle. So in this video, I'm going to be comparing two of the most popular saddles from one of the most popular saddle hunting brands in the industry, that being the Tethrd UltraLock SD and the Tethrd Carnivore 2-panel saddle. These are both saddles that are fairly new, extremely premium saddles with a lot of features, and two saddles that are built for all-day comfort. I've spent significant time hunting in both of these, and I feel like I can draw a pretty good comparison between the two, highlight some pros and cons of each depending on your hunting style, and hopefully that will help you make a decision if you're in the market for a new saddle and considering these two options. I'm going to break this comparison video into several categories, the first of which is comfort. Comfort is extremely important for any type of hunting, whether you're in a hang-on stand, a climber, or a saddle. If you can't sit still and be comfortable for hours on end, you're not going to be an effective hunter. So finding a saddle that fits you and is comfortable enough to sit all day is going to be critically important. When it comes to comfort, I think these are both very comfortable saddles, but I wanted to highlight a few differences. First, I'll talk about the Carnivore. The Carnivore is a 2-panel saddle, which means that it has 2 independent panels that you can adjust anywhere you'd like, which gives it some versatility. I'll talk more about that later, but I think that versatility can give you comfort because it gives you more options. With that said, I do think that the mesh portion of a saddle is the most comfortable portion of the saddle. And a 2-panel saddle, because it's made of 2 smaller panels instead of 1 large panel, has more webbing throughout the mesh portions of the saddle. As you can see, a 2-panel saddle is going to have double the webbing of a single panel saddle because it has webbing at the top and bottom of each panel. And most saddles that are 2 panels will also have these vertical webbing straps running through the mesh. What I find personally is that if I am experiencing discomfort in a saddle, it's because the webbing is digging into my hips or my legs. So because of that, even though the Carnivore is an extremely comfortable saddle, I found that the additional webbing was kind of digging into me a little bit more than in the UltraLock, which is a single panel saddle that's expandable. That large mesh panel is extremely comfortable, and that's why when it comes to comfort, I'm going to give a slight edge to the UltraLock SD. Now, I will caveat this by saying I just got the Carnivore this year, and I've used it a handful of times this season, while this is actually my 3rd season using the UltraLock. So I am a little bit more familiar with that saddle, and it's easier for me to get comfortable in it just because I've used it. I know it like the back of my hand, and it doesn't take much adjusting. If we're gonna put comfort on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most comfortable and 1 being extremely uncomfortable, I would put the UltraLock at a true 10. I would put the Carnivore at maybe a 7 or an 8. You can still get it very comfortable, but it takes a little bit more work and a little bit of experience to kind of dial in the comfort in a 2-panel saddle. I think that's more of a function of it being a 2-panel versus 1-panel design rather than the actual construction of this specific 2-panel saddle. But it's worth noting that if comfort is at the top of your list, I would lean towards the UltraLock SD. The next category I want to compare these saddles in is design and layout. Both of these saddles brought something new to the style of saddle that they are, meaning the UltraLock is a 1-panel pleated design. That's not a new technology. There have been plenty of pleated saddles on the market before. And the Carnivore saddle is a 2-panel saddle. Again, nothing new. Some of the original saddle designs were 2-panel saddles. I think something that Tethrd does exceptionally well is that when they introduce a saddle that uses a design that exists in the marketplace, they always do something to improve upon it, and they're not just throwing their hat in the ring with a copy of something that already exists. So when it comes to the 1-panel pleated design, they added the elastic bands that kind of compress the saddle and keep it small, organized, and out of the way when you're not sitting in it, but when you're walking with it. Previous pleated designs over time would just kind of flop down and be a little bit uncomfortable to walk in. The UltraLock does a really good job of kind of self-compressing. It doesn't feel much bigger or bulkier than something like the Tethrd Phantom, which I've used before, which is a much smaller single-panel design. Another design feature I really like in the UltraLock series saddle is the comfort channels. Basically, this is how Tethrd chose to approach the issue of saddles kind of like riding up or being able to adjust the pressure on the top or bottom depending on if you're sitting, leaning, or standing. If you're not familiar with this system, basically there's a girth hitch on each side of your bridge that connects to what feels like a marble sewn into the bridge loops on the saddle. Essentially, this gives you multiple options for how you want the pressure on your saddle to sit. You simply loosen that girth hitch and slide it up or down, and it sits in a groove in between those marbles to kind of apply pressure to the lower or higher portion of the saddle. This was a really smart system to avoid the issue I've had with previous saddles, which is that they just tend to kind of ride up over time as you're sitting in them. I haven't had any of those issues with the UltraLock, and I find it extremely comfortable, largely because you can adjust that pressure. I've found that I don't really move it very often unless I'm in a really weird kind of crooked tree and I want one side a little higher than the other to compensate for that. But you can kind of find what works for you, and generally you'll probably be able to leave it there. On the other hand, the Carnivore 2-panel saddle, again, a great design that I think improves upon previous 2-panel designs, and the way that it does that primarily is the way that the 2 panels attach together. Tethrd incorporated something called the rad button, which they've had available as an accessory for several years, but they're using the same technology and the same system to lock the two panels together when you're walking in and out wearing the saddle. Previous two-panel designs use things like magnets or straps and buckles, but I think this is a really clean way to attach the two panels together without the use of magnets, and the rad buttons are extremely easy to use as soon as you get the hang of how to deploy them. You can do it silently by pulling back on the lever, pushing it down, and letting it go, or you can do it with a small snap just by simply pushing like that. So it's a pretty quiet system, it's a very reliable system. You don't have to fuss with magnets or anything like that, which I really do enjoy. The one downside to the rad button connection system is that it's a little bit thick and bulky. I use a traditional frame pack, like an Exo Mountain Gear frame pack, for saddle hunting. And any pack with a waist belt is going to run into some issues with these rad buttons because the system as a whole is about 1 inch or 2 wide, meaning when these rad buttons are between your backpack and your back, you're gonna feel that pressure on the rad buttons. It's not a huge deal, but I found that I had to ride my saddle way up to make it comfortable, so these weren't digging into the lumbar pad on my backpack. And probably the coolest feature on the Carnivore saddle is the new bridge design that really allows you to adjust the pressure between the two panels of the saddle. It really lets you fine-tune that pressure. It comes with something that they're calling bridge bushings included and pre-installed. This basically is a smooth piece of plastic that slips into those girth hitches and allows your bridge to kind of slide freely between as you shift. So if you raise or lower a panel, that pressure is going to kind of equalize between the top and bottom panels without you having to adjust manually. These are also completely removable and replaceable, so if you don't like them and you would rather have it kind of locked into position so it's not shifting around on you, you can fairly easily do that. I tried it both ways and found that it was more comfortable with the bridge bushings installed. You're still able to manually slide and adjust a little bit, but you just don't have to with every little adjustment of the panels themselves. Moving on next to ease of use. As I mentioned when kind of explaining these two saddles, I think that the Carnivore saddle is a little more complex to use and it has a little bit more adjustability, which I don't view as a bad thing. But if simplicity is what you're going for, I think the UltraLock is pretty dummy-proof. You literally put it on, you put the comfort channels where you like them and they stay there. You sit in the saddle and you pull down on that bottom webbing and it's completely comfortable. There's very little adjustment required. The bridge is adjustable for the length that you want. The comfort channels are adjustable. Beyond that, the saddle is very comfortable right out of the box. There's no practice needed. If you've used a saddle before or understand how to use a saddle, that's going to be a very simple product for you to understand. It's not going to take much practice. The Carnivore, on the other hand, has a lot more room for adjustment and a lot more micro adjustments built into the saddle, which I think is a really good design. But along with that comes the complexity of having to figure that out, having to figure out where you like it. And the one thing I wasn't a fan of is when I was using this saddle, if you would shift your weight out of the saddle a little bit, that second panel had a tendency to drop down, and then from there you kind of have to get it back into position and put it where you'd like it, as opposed to the one panel saddle which just kind of stays on you the whole time. There's no two panels to kind of separate. When there's pressure on the Carnivore and you're sitting in it, it's completely comfortable and I really like it a lot. It just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of practice to get it into a place that's comfortable. And then again, if you're standing up to either execute a weak side shot or just to kind of rest your legs a little bit, that second panel is going to kind of drop down. If you like two panel saddles, I think this is a great one, but I do think the two panel saddle is a little bit trickier to use and takes a little bit more practice. The next category is going to be weight. Now, personally, I take this with a grain of salt because weight is not that critical to me on a saddle. When you're wearing that weight, rather than carrying it, I think it's very negligible, the difference between weights in saddles. So if one saddle is 2 pounds and one's 2.5 pounds, personally, that isn't something that's going to decide whether I buy one or the other, unless all else is completely equal. With that said, I know some people are very interested in trying to cut weight wherever possible, so I weighed both of these saddles side by side on my home scale. For the two saddles that I have, the UltraLock weighed 33.75 ounces, and the Carnivore weighed 37.35 ounces. So again, these are both within the realm of 2 pounds, give or take a few ounces, just a tick over 2 pounds. The difference is pretty negligible, but the UltraLock SD has a slight advantage when it comes to weight. Next, I want to compare the bulk and wearability of these saddles. But this is an important component of saddle design and something that I do put a bit of a premium on. One of the biggest advantages of a 2-panel and a single-panel pleated design is that they give you all-day comfort because of that expandability without being bulky to carry in like a traditional large panel saddle. And I think that both of these models do that extremely well. Both of them shrink way down to the size of a much smaller saddle like the Phantom, but once you're in the tree you can expand them for comfort, and then they very easily compress back for your walk out, which I think is a huge advantage when it comes to saddle comfort and wearability. I do think that between these two saddles, the 2-panel design of the Carnivore compresses a little bit more My understanding is that the footprint is basically identical to the Phantom saddle, which is a pretty small one-panel saddle. And I did notice that when I was comparing these two, it does feel smaller on you than the UltraLock does. It's a pretty negligible difference, but this one's going to give a slight advantage to the Carnivore two-panel saddle. Again, I wanted to quickly mention in this category that the rad button system does add a little bit of bulk on the waistband of the Carnivore. If you're not wearing the type of frame pack that I'm wearing with a true lumbar pad, it's probably not something that you're going to even notice. So in the end, after spending significant time hunting from both of these saddles, I think I'm going to stick with my UltraLock SD for most situations. I think the Carnivore is a great design, and some people out there just love two-panel designs and are really glad to see Tethrd kind of offering something new in this category. If you're a two-panel person and you've been wanting to check out a Tethrd saddle because you like some of their other features, I think this is going to be a great option for you. I think that in the end, I'm just a little bit more of a single panel person. They're a little bit more comfortable for me. If you're brand new to saddle hunting, I would suggest you go with the UltraLock SD. It's actually slightly cheaper, and I think it's one of the best saddles of all time. If you're watching this and you are interested in these saddles and you have questions that I didn't address in this video, feel free to leave a comment below. I try my best to answer every question I get, and I really appreciate all the comments that I've been receiving.